Welcome to the program. Civil society activists believe that Ukraine's success in persecuting high-profile corrupt officials largely depends on the establishment of an independent anti-corruption court. Last week, the demand for the creation of this court was lifted by European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. Transparency International Ukraine is opposing the creation of an alternative of the anti-corruption court in the country. Joining us in the studio today is Maxim Kostetsky. He's a lawyer working with Transparency International in Ukraine. So, as I have already said, Jean-Claude Juncker said that he actually praised the idea of creating court chambers instead of anti-corruption court. And a lot of people have already voiced their opinion that such an initiative is going to be totally ineffective in Ukraine. Could you explain?
Good afternoon. We, as International Network Fighting Corruption, were almost and absolutely surprised by this statement made by Jean-Claude Juncker, because, of course, in recent years, all civil society organizations have been pressuring Ukrainian authorities to work on the issue of creating of anti-corruption court, because absolutely we understand that the work of NABU and Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office must be taken to the end, and it will fulfill the circle of anti-corruption institution created in Ukraine, which is why it was quite surprising to hear that creation of anti-corruption chambers in the existing court system with the existing judges would be a solution, because of course it's not. Which is why Transparency International and other civic society organizations that are forming coalition reformation package of reforms made a statement to our European partners in order to explain whether or not they meant what was said in that statement. And yesterday we actually received an official answer from the European Commission, which I can show on camera here, where the office of Mr. Juncker explains that there was no change, there was no shift in his position on the creation of anti-corruption court. What was meant by Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker is that it is for Ukraine to decide what kind of institution that should be, but what they are emphasizing on is that two things need to happen. First of all, this institution needs to be independent and impartial from all the other stakeholders that could influence it. And the second issue is that open and independent selection process of judges must be stated, which is why even if this institution would be called chamber or court, it would first of all mean that we need new independent judges in a new independent institution, which would be stated and which should be ensured while creating that thing. Well, of course, when Ukrainian authorities are talking about chambers, they mean not changing anything. They basically mean to take the existing judges in the remaining court system and just call them anti-corruption judges, as they are.
Doesn't it mean that those politicians who are lobbying for creating the chambers instead of a high anti-corruption court, they're kind of playing intricate games with our European partners, because clearly, our European partners are not quite well aware of how the judiciary system in Ukraine actually works.
Of course. I think that Ukrainian authorities used this opportunity to try to influence European partners in order to show that, hey, their demands are not as they used to be before, and using their understanding of the judicial system in Ukraine as it is, and trying to influence them. But as we see by the reaction of civil society of Ukraine, and as we see by the response that we got from the European Commission, they are not so easily tricked. They basically, I think that his words made by Mr. Juncker were actually misinterpreted, which puts now Ukrainian authorities in quite a bad position, because it means that they try to trick him into doing something. And I think
what could be the outcome of Ukrainian politicians trying to trick European partners?
I think there would be unofficial talks with Mr. Poroshenko and Mr. Groisman regarding this issue, because basically this turned out to be a scandal for the President of European Commission, because he had to explain himself for a week, and a whole majority of international and Ukrainian civic society organizations were quite surprised by this issue, and they wanted the response from European Commission, which is why I think that he's not going to state it officially, but I think there are going to be some unofficial talks with the Ukrainian authorities in order to not undermine their influence, because...
Could this scandal have any influence on further Ukraine's European integration?
I don't think so. I think it's just a minor step down as for Mr. Juncker and for Ukrainian authorities. It's all going to depend on whether or not Ukrainian Parliament is going to make this happen in autumn, because we already have 2 anti-corruption draft laws in the Parliament. First, creating the High Anti-Corruption Court, and second, creating the anti-corruption chambers under existing court system. First one was submitted to the Rada by Mr. Sobolev and his colleagues from other factions, and the second one was from the presidential faction of BPP, made by MP Alexeyev, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that it's for our parliament and, of course, President to decide whether or not we're going to have this anti-corruption.
But basically, we already have the key lines for creating anti-corruption court formed into a law, which is signed by the president. So, if I'm not mistaken, there is no opportunity to step right or left from what is stated in the law.
Yeah, but what is written in the law, it could be changed if they want to. So
hopefully they don't.
Of course. What Transparency International tries to emphasize is that we already got High Anti-Corruption Court written in the law on judiciary. And if it's written, please do make sure that it's going to be created. In the law, it states that it has to be created 1 year from the adoption of the law on the High Anti-Corruption Court. So basically, after they vote on the law, on the creation of High Anti-Corruption Court, they've got 1 year to create it, which means that it's still enough time to make the procedure as clear as possible and make sure that the judges that are truly independent will get into that institution.
What needs to be done?
Well,
to fulfill that
first
obligation?
of all, the law needs to be voted upon in the Parliament.
And
what we want to include in that law is a couple issues that are extremely important. First of all is the court has to be independent, and the process of selecting judges has to be controlled by a special commission, half of which should be included by the people who are recommended by international partners, which means that if international community is involved in the selection process, we are more sure that the people who are going to go through this procedure are more independent and impartial. Because as we see through the process of selecting judges into the Supreme Court of Ukraine, there are a lot of issues and questions arising during this process. That's because international partners were not part of this process. Second important issue is creation of appellate chamber, independent appellate chamber in this High Anti-Corruption Court institution, because it is of extreme importance for the process of judging. First of all, if the first instance court will make a decision, an appellate court can just cancel it and make sure that the person is not going to be taken to justice, to be brought to justice, which is why we need to ensure that the appellate chamber would be as independent as the first instance chamber, in this case it's High Anti-Corruption Court. And the third issue that is important as well is providing high remuneration for the judges regarding the fact that they are going to be dealing with the cases dealing with millions and billions of dollars.
High-profile officials.
And, of course, and grand corruption. If you're talking about these people, you need to understand that they have a huge amount of money, and it's extremely important to make sure that judges are not seduced by the amounts of bribe they will be given by those people.
They will be offered.
And one more thing is providing security for the judges and members of their family, because 100% that if they are not going to be subject to financial influence, there are going to be a different influence, even threats to their families, to members of their families, which is why it is important to make sure that people feel safe when doing their job.
After the anti-corruption court is created, would it make a change in the Ukrainian society trusting more in the Ukrainian judiciary system? Because currently the statistics shows that only 40% of Ukrainians actually trust the judges that are working in the 40.
I think even lower than 40.
Well, I've heard 40, and this is an extremely small amount. Do you think the creation of anti-corruption court could change that?
I most certainly hope so. I think that when people see that actual people who did take bribes, who are involved in corruption, actually go to prison, it might have result in the shift in their consciousness, because I strictly believe that when people see that NABU is working, prosecution is working, but when it goes to court, there is nothing we can do, because all the judges, well, majority of judges in existing court system, unfortunately, are corrupt, and usually the process is taking very long time, and the best lawyers in the country are defending people who are corruptionists. Which is why we extremely believe that the creation of an independent institution would make a difference. And as soon as people see that there are first court decisions putting people to prison for the things they do to Ukrainian society, for the money they have taken from Ukrainian budget, for their unbelievable sums of money that were just stolen from Ukrainian people, I think that after that, society will change their minds regarding court system. It's going to be a huge step for us.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for such an interesting conversation. That was Maxim Kostetsky, a lawyer with Transparency International Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.